All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode. I'm, of course, here with Colleen,
Hello.
and we're excited to have our guest today, Michaela Daystar. Hi, Michaela.
Hello.
Welcome. Michaela is, well, a multifaceted being, of course, but she is also a Reiki master, teacher, lots of things that she does. Soul collage. She's a trauma-informed Reiki practitioner and teacher and specializes in that. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And then also one of the hosts of the Reiki Women Podcast. So we are excited to have you. I know our conversation will expand out from there as well, but we'll just get started there for now. But first, we
Sounds
always
good.
want to start with your story. How did you come to this Reiki world and the other things that you do as a part of it?
Yeah, thank you. I love the invitation to begin with story. Um, when we're thinking about the story of how we came to do what we do, right, there's so many different entry points that one could pick. And I think that what feels at the surface today is to begin with what my previous career was, which was that I worked in higher education for about 15 years, running social justice leadership development programs, supporting students to be change makers around the things that they're passionate about, that matter to them, and giving them the skills to do that, to go out and work in nonprofits, to be movement leaders, and so on. And I love that work, and it's dear to my heart, and felt incredibly meaningful, and was what I thought I would do forever. It's what I went to graduate school for, social justice leadership development. And for a number of years, there was this like niggling feeling that grew and grew into an awareness that um, the people that we were supporting, the students, were coming to us to change the world in large part because they had been harmed by the world. They had experienced some form of oppression, some form of violence, some form of unfairness or injustice, either themselves or people that they loved. And out of that harm, they wanted to make a difference, which is, of course, a beautiful impulse. But the challenge was that they were still carrying the harm, and they were coming into this work, which is incredibly demanding, incredibly thankless, often exhausting. And the cycle of burnout of people having, anxiety disorders and, mental health breakdowns, and ultimately leaving their work in some cases was quite prevalent, and something that we talked a lot about, what to do about it. And so often that was approached from a logistical perspective. And what I kept feeling was people are coming to this work hurt, and we need to address that hurt in order for them to be resilient and to be persistent in the work that they want to do, and in order for them to feel joyful and to feel alive and to feel connected and easeful in that work, even when it's hard. And I had no idea how to do that. um, and so, kind of parallel to that, I went through my own, journey of crisis. My marriage ending, that was a really difficult, an abusive situation that went on for far too long. So there was a kind of deconstruction of my own life that was happening. And as is often the case when we hit a deconstruction phase, a collapsing tower phase of life, we become potentially more open to influence and information and methodologies and things that perhaps we haven't paid attention to before. And so that was definitely the case for me. I started just noticing in the environment, when people would talk about something, it would just, like, my intuition was like, grab that, pull that in. And so I practiced a lot of different things at that time, really was experimenting with a lot of things, working with a lot of practitioners, everything from 12-step programs to, shamanic journeying to therapy to just all the things. And it was really beautiful. I mean, it's an incredibly painful time, but it was also really beautiful. Just like, hey, what is there to heal a heart, out there in the world? And many things came into my life. Not all of them stayed. The two that really did stay were Reiki and were SoulCollage. And that is, often the case that when we have something that has really transformed our own life, we want to share it out. And so I started, tentatively bringing some pieces in with my students, some, visioning processes. Did some soul collage with them, started bringing in a little bit of meditation. It was a time when there was definitely a kind of a distance between anything that felt like spiritual practice or, kind of odd things were just not really present, in the mainstream of the university that I was in. So it was very tentative, but incredibly enthusiastically received. So that just kind of planted the seed that maybe there is something else here that I'm supposed to do that can maybe begin to touch those places that I've been so frustrated that I didn't know how to impact for my students, those places of hurt and a sense of a lack of wholeness that had brought them to the work in the first place. So that was the origin story, and then it branched from there. But I'll pause there for now.
I think that is, I actually want you to keep going. I'm honest. So
Okay.
we're here, and then you've obviously made the transition to where you are today with your business and your practice, which did that include leaving your teaching position? And how did that transition happen? And then, because that's a big leap, and also
Yeah.
something that so many people can identify with, because we have to take that leap at some point if this is the work like we're called to. And so
Totally.
yeah, how did that all happen? And also how,
Yeah.
like how long have you been doing this now, and that kind of thing too. So yeah, I
Yeah,
want you to
absolutely.
keep going actually.
Okay, amazing. So yeah, I would say that this arc of the story began around 2015.
Mhm.
I went to a graduate school 2015, 16, and is that right? 16, I don't know, time is a construct.
Somewhere,
It's
yeah,
it's easy
somewhere
to
in
lose
there.
track. In the
That's
teens,
fine.
somewhere in the
Yes,
teens and the
somewhere in
aughts. Um, and so I was beginning to study Reiki with a person here in my town who practices what I would call like traditional Western Reiki, is how I would classify that at this point. So I was working with her. I did the soul collage facilitator training, was incorporating those things into my own practice, into my life, experimenting with friends and so on. And then at the same time, I was going to graduate school. And so I was starting to feel this tension between this kind of what felt like a new calling. It felt like a clarification of some of these, points of dissatisfaction that I'd been feeling. But I didn't know what that looks like as far as a job. Like what is that job, right? And I had been, investing in a career path in, higher education, leadership development for many, many years. And that's what my grad program was in. And so it really felt like I had to choose, like it was one or the other, like there was a crossroads kind of feeling, right? And as had always been the case before, it felt like these things that were more about soul and more about creativity and exploration of the internal landscape, that probably was going to have to just be relegated to hobby or to, things that I did informally. And so I chose to go to grad school in the path that I was already on. But, we often experience the trickster nature of this universe, the sense of humor that exists out there in the ether. And I landed in a graduate program that was very much focused on internal development. It was actually at a Catholic university, which was not why I chose it. It was very funny to me that I ended up at a Catholic school. But their graduate program was very, much not Catholic focused. But because they were in a school that was rooted in spiritual development, they very much rooted their program in internal development. And so, all of a sudden I'm in these classes that are having me examine my core values and examine, my own journey of feeling the injustice of the world, but from a feeling place, not a let's solve the problems place. I mean, we certainly got to that point as well, but there was always this thread of self inquiry and of examining our relationship to each other and to the world. And that was very much new in my education. My undergrad had not been like that. And it was very compelling. And at a certain point, I kind of disclosed to my cohort this feeling of tension of like, oh, I'm feeling so called to this other kind of work, but I want to still help, in social justice realms. I want to still help make the world a better place. And they kind of looked at me like I was speaking nonsense. And they're like, why do you think that's two different things?
Mm.
Why do you feel like we, the leadership of movements, don't need spiritual and personal development to come alongside our work? And of course, when we look at social justice movements across time, they often will have a spiritual root to them of some kind. And it was this incredible revelation. It was like I was given permission by the universe to do this thing. And also instruction and a mandate to not hold those two things as separate and to in fact bring them together and to make that more explicit. But I still didn't know what that looked like as a job. So I did start, got a business license, a business bank account. I'm like, I don't know what this business is, but here it is. And just kind of floundered there for about a year. And then again, fate intervened, and my university was actually sold to another university. It was really quite sad. It was one of the oldest women's colleges in the United States, and it is now consumed by a much larger university. And in that process, there were many, many waves of layoffs, and eventually that wave took me under, and I was laid off. And it felt like, I had just been like huddling in this nest, and the universe is like, out you go, little bird, go fly. You know? I don't know that I would have left my job. I don't know that I would have had the courage to do it. But fate intervened. And so with, having unemployment for a period of time, I was like, all right, well, now's the time to give this a try. And I don't know how to run a business, and I don't know what I'm doing. And I didn't know what I was doing for a couple of years. And then I finally got some business training and, really spent some time solidifying what exactly is Heartscapes? What is this work meant to be in the world? Um, and how do I communicate that to people in a way that can resonate with them and help them kind of find a home here? And that was an incredibly fun and challenging process that also coincided with shifting my Reiki practice to focus on the Japanese origins of the system, which had to do with a lot of things, but integrity and effectiveness being the two primary drivers of that. So, with those kind of circumstances all coming together, Heartscapes finally kind of found its roots and began to grow.
Always interesting when the things that seem hard, it's like, losing your job is really we can see it in retrospect that was what was meant to happen to get you into that path.
Yeah, absolutely.
So many of us can relate to that, myself included.
Yeah.
It definitely compels us in its own way.
Oh.
So then where are you now with it? Like tell us about your practices and some of the, talking about the trauma-informed practitioner, I think is a really beneficial topic for people too. And at some point we've talked about soul collage, and you and I both know what that means, but not everybody listening knows what that is either.
Yeah, absolutely. So now the primary focus of Heartscapes is teaching. So I've always just at heart been a teacher, no matter what my job was, from retail to tattoo artist to working in a university directing programs to being a Reiki person. Fundamentally, it always came back down to teaching. And so that's my passion. It's my love. I absolutely love teaching, and I love teaching teachers. So I also have a teaching apprenticeship program. And so I teach the system of Reiki over a 9-month program. As I said, we focus on the Japanese origins of the system, which is really a different system than the original one that I learned. And we really work with that system in a deep and kind of elongated, spacious way for people to find that path of self-development, to build their relationship to themselves, to each other, to the world, and then to let that be a compass for them. And so in that context, then I'm also working with people one-on-one. I'm offering other kind of continuing education classes, including one coming up in the spring, working through the Book of Joy, which is one of my primary texts, exploring both grief and joy in ways that are aligned with the system of Reiki from its origins. And then of course seeing clients, having those really wonderful opportunities to support people and where they are in their journey. And I find that the people that tend to come both as students and clients are people that are in a state of self-reflection. It just seems to kind of always come back to that, who are wanting to impact the world from a place of feeling joyful and rooted rather than stressed and pressured, and to find the way to do hard things in their lives and in the world, from a joyful place, which happens to be medicine that I think our world, especially here in the United States, really needs right now. And so, as I said, continuing to hold that lens of social justice, we do also do a lot of focus on things that are happening in the world, current events that are happening. We very much hold a kind of progressive political perspective here. I'm very overt about that. It took a while to get there. It can be challenging to kind of put that part of ourself out into a business or a practice that is not explicitly typically connected with those kinds of things. But I found that the more honest we are about who we are, what matters to us, the better aligned we are with our clients. And that has definitely been true. And so, yeah, we like to be a space that's just very responsive to what matters to people. And then
What
the
does,
SoulCollage.
can you explain what, because I want to talk about the trauma-informed practice part of it. So
Yeah.
can you explain what that is and how you incorporate it in your teaching? Because also not everybody's going to know what exactly that means.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, can you define it and then talk about how you're teaching it, I guess, or maybe I think actually as a practitioner, because that's probably a more applicable to the broader audience that we have, of like as a practitioner, how you're taking that into account would maybe be a more appropriate line for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally speaking, what it means to be trauma informed in any profession, in any realm, is to, firstly be aware that most people have experienced some form of trauma in our lives, and that there are ways in which that trauma impacts our thinking, our emotional landscape, and our physiology, our bodies. We're living in a time where we know much more about that. The neuroscience and fields of psychology and the blending between those things are much more advanced than they were even 10, 15 years ago. And so we really know a lot about the way in which traumatic experiences impact the brain, impact our neurology, impact our chemistry, and therefore the ways that we feel, the ways that we think, and our behaviors, and the ways in which those things can really negatively impact our lives. And so more and more, it's become more and more common and important to kind of have a basic awareness of that, and a basic awareness of how to structure our spaces in a way that minimize the possibility of bringing trauma to the surface for a person, particularly in fields that are intimate, where the nature of the work is to be in close physical, emotional, mental proximity to people, which is certainly true for Reiki practitioners. And this perspective has become quite commonplace in fields such as yoga and mindfulness meditation. Yoga in particular has really taken this on much earlier. And so trauma-informed yoga practice has become much more common. And, in yoga, that looks a particular way. It has a lot to do with the physical adjustments one does with the body, making sure that we build consent into anytime we're touching a person, and even like allowing people to choose the modifications that they do and so on. So really having a lot of focus on allowing people to feel that they're in control of their experience, that they're given opportunities to choose and to consent, and that they're given clear information about what to expect within the space is kind of some of the bedrocks of a trauma-informed perspective. And so that's been very much normalized and codified within yoga, also beginning in mindfulness meditation practice, but I was not seeing it showing up within the Reiki community. And I was trained in trauma-informed care through the teaching apprenticeship program that I did for holding spiritual spaces, not Reiki specifically, but had worked for many, many years with an organization that basically held spiritual containers for women in a trauma-informed way. So I was, fairly well versed in kind of what that looks like, the protocols, the mindsets that one would have to create a trauma-informed space. And I just was not seeing that in the world of Reiki. In fact, I was seeing the opposite of that. I was experiencing and even being taught practices that were in violation of that, those principles. For example, I was never taught to ask for consent to touch my clients. I think there's just an assumption that if you're here for a Reiki session, you're fine with being touched. That is not the case. Not everybody wants to be touched, but they don't always know that they have the option, right? So normalizing the fact that we can share Reiki with a person perfectly well with touch or no touch, and making that a normal spectrum is one foundational practice. There's also certain mindsets within particularly kind of new age forms of Western Reiki that are in opposition to a trauma-informed mindset. In particular, the notion that Reiki can cause no harm. This is a very common refrain: Reiki can cause no harm. And from a certain point of view, that's true. From other points of view, it is not true. I think it's important to distinguish the word Reiki. We use it interchangeably in ways that can muddy the waters. Reiki as a phenomenon, spiritual energy, the energy that animates us, that connects us to all life, that is what we are, that is present with us at all times, can cause no harm because it is what we are. The system of Reiki, a system of practice enacted by people with other people that involves intimacy and often touch, can absolutely cause harm. It can cause harm unintentionally, it can cause harm intentionally. And I have seen it over and over again. I have caused harm unintentionally by being careless in my practice. And I almost left my practice when I was a brand new practitioner and had an experience where a thing that I did not prep the person for, and that I did not think through how that could land for someone, did not know that this person had been recently assaulted, caused her quite a bit of harm in the middle of a Reiki session. And it really became clear that our community really needed to talk about that, and to really needed to understand what it looks like to create a container for safety, choice, consent, and therefore trust within our Reiki spaces. And so I spent about 2 years studying trauma-informed yoga, trauma-informed mindfulness, going back to the training that I'd had before, and then really looking at how to translate those principles and mindsets to our specifics here in the system of Reiki, and how to make that easy, to give a lot of flexibility for practitioners, to still create their practice in the way that reflects who they are, but that also takes into account safety, choice, consent, and therefore trust for their clients. And so how that looks now is I have a pretty robust course that currently is offered as a self-paced course, so it's pre-recorded. And then I occasionally offer it live when people request it. But primarily it's as a self-paced course that is run through Thinkific, and that outlines 10 principles of trauma-informed Reiki care and offers practices and mindsets that people can integrate into their practice to align with that perspective. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I agree with you. And I know, well, some of the ones too is additionally to what you mentioned, because we always teach consent and touch and preference and specifics of touch. Sometimes people are fine go ahead and place your hands on my ears, but
Mhm.
don't place your hands on my belly. So going over each of the hand positions. Um, and I think the other one that is also really important is staying within the scope of your practice. So, when I was hearing trauma informed, I was like, well, okay, what does that mean as a practitioner? Because I have to stay within the skill set of my practice, that I am not trained in trauma skills or trauma therapies.
Yeah.
I am a Reiki practitioner, and I think that's another really important piece of that.
It really is. And I'm glad that you pointed that out because trauma-informed care in Reiki is not the same as trauma treatment. And I think that's one of the places where our lines get blurred because I often
Mhm.
will hear Reiki practitioners talking about treating their clients' trauma with Reiki. And that, Reiki can absolutely be part of a really powerful trauma treatment program. But, part of being trauma informed is finding out if that client has a trauma specialist that they're working with, if they are in fact working through trauma. And as you just said, to kind of stay in our lane, to understand what is ours and what is not ours. And that's actually one of the principles. One of those 10 principles is to understand, who we are and who we aren't, and what we are trained for and what we're not. And so being trauma informed is really about creating a container of safety. It is not about treating trauma unless we have been trained to do that. There is certainly overlap. There's certainly people who have that kind of training and are also Reiki practitioners, but most of us aren't. Most of us are kind of in this other realm. And so those kinds of layers of subtlety are really important. And then also to have some, basic understanding of what to do if, we've done everything that we can and still somebody has a trauma response. They're triggered for some way because we can't guarantee that people won't. I mean, there are infinite ways in which a particular person can be stimulated to relive that trauma. And so we can do our best, but we're not perfect, and we cannot account for every single thing a person is going to walk in our door with. They also often aren't going to tell us, what it is, and they might not know what it is that would be problematic for them. And so also just kind of having some basic tools to kind of de-escalate something that if it does come up, and then to have resources available to redirect that client to, should it be needed. Yeah.
Absolutely referral. It's and the same thing for myself as a practitioner. I do require that people who need additional either physical, um, assistance or mental health assistance, that I'm very clear that Reiki is an integrative practice, complementary, but also that they need that additional support.
Yeah.
And as a Reiki practitioner, that I am going to um, always consider what their mental health practitioner is teaching them rather than anything I think about it. So I think
Absolutely.
that's another really important piece of it.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I want to I want to make clear that like working with these principles is about allowing us as practitioners to feel more confident, more at ease, and more empowered within creating that container of safety. When I first started talking about this publicly in various Reiki spaces, I actually got a lot of pushback, quite a lot, much more than I expected. Fair amount of anger coming my way when I started speaking of this. And one of the things that often came up was that I'm gonna scare practitioners out of practicing, so I should not do that. And that again, Reiki can cause no harm. So what I am saying doesn't make any sense. That anything that happens inside of a Reiki session, because Reiki can cause no harm, anything that happens inside of this session for this person is meant to be, it's part of their healing journey. That is not correct. That's just flat out not true. Um, and, the idea of people, being frightened by the possibility of someone having a traumatic response in their sessions and that being a reason not to address it also make no sense to me, right? Because the fact is, it's going to happen to some of us sometimes, right? I've heard now so many stories of people that were like, something happened with my client. I was really confused by it. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know what to do, right? And for me, I would rather a person come in with knowledge and skills and context for that sort of a thing rather than to have it just blindside them because they weren't told to expect it or to know that it could happen. And to really interrogate, how we hold our spaces, and that's something that feels good and right to us might feel very threatening to someone else. And just to account for that, right? It's ultimately not hard, but it is about being consistent and being aware, and we can do that. That part is easy.
Well, I think it actually supports the practitioner
Absolutely.
in not crossing over the line of what their skill set is, and that it's really beneficial to have that understanding so that they know these are the things that matter. Because that is again something that we always say, the energy of Reiki doesn't cause harm, but the practitioner can. Behaviors can. And in one of the places is moving out of your lane, moving out of the scope of your practice, sharing, no discretion about what they share or perceive in a session, that there needs to be, um, first of all, a lot of skill in it, but also an awareness that that is a very specific um, part of a session and behavior by the practitioner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then I
I
think
also,
another one, oh,
oh,
go ahead, Robin.
I just wanted to add to this part too, that actually, as a practitioner, it can be helpful from the perspective of, yes, how we practition, but it also can help us to clarify that lane, because sometimes clients might even come in with an expectation of
Yes.
what Reiki can do and what Reiki can't do. And by having those standards of practice or codes of ethics and this awareness that, it's not uncommon for people maybe to hear things about Reiki or spirituality in general and have an expectation that it may fix things, right? We get those
Yeah,
questions
absolutely.
like, oh, it didn't fix this right away. But as a
Right.
practitioner, it's helpful to have these outlines to be able to relay also that level of expectation to the client, so
Absolutely.
there's not that piece of it in the mix as well.
Absolutely. And I think that that comes with maturity as practitioners, right? Really understanding what we are and what we aren't and being able to communicate that, with clarity and compassion, right? Like when we're not able to actually meet the expectations of our client, we need to say that. And I have had folks who it did seem were looking to avoid the work of therapy. It's obviously can be a very intimidating thing to step into a trauma therapy experience, or sometimes that's outside of a person's belief system, or just they're not enculturated to see therapy or other types of psychological intervention as appropriate or right. And I have a lot of respect for people, wanting to find their own lanes. But then we also need to, on the other side, need to be able to articulate what this work is and what it isn't. And if somebody, I had a client who, literally was like, I am here to heal my childhood sexual trauma. And at the time, I was so inexperienced a practitioner that I was like, okay, sure, let's do that. And that did not go well. It did not go well.
Exactly.
And I ended up having to, put the brakes and say, actually, I think you need something different. And that was really unskilled of me to do that. And that was one of the experiences that prompted me to say, hang on.
Yeah.
I need to understand this line better than I do. That was about 10 years ago. And yeah, so helping our clients understand the incredible benefit of incorporating something like Reiki into their healing journey and to allow that to be robust and get what they need.
Well, I think it's also safety for the practitioner to
Absolutely.
have that awareness and scope. And actually that is the terminology that I will use if someone is outside of the scope of my practice, is I will say, this really is outside of the scope of my practice. Here is my recommendation. Here are referrals. Fortunately, we live in an area and have, other practitioners that are skilled in trauma and counseling and Reiki, so they can combine it all. But that is the specific terminology that I will use is, this really is outside of the scope of my practice.
Yeah.
And here's my recommendation.
Yeah, and I love that we're in a time when, again, because of the research that has been done into the neurology of trauma, that we understand that the mind-body connection is so important. And so there's a more openness to, embodiment-based practice, spiritual practice, meditation to be an important part, not just a nice thing to do, but an important part of a trauma recovery journey when it is handled appropriately. And so I now have clients who refer to me by their therapists,
Yeah,
which is
yes.
thrilling to me because, again, in the past, both with higher education and with psychology, often it felt like those were two separate worlds from what we do here. And I think that is becoming less and less true. And I love to see that.
Well, the integrative part of it. Yeah.
It's so huge, the integrative. I mean, from our own perspective of clients who are working with their, therapy or the other things that they might be doing and watching the integration of that and Reiki and, like you said, people that might even be referred to Reiki by um, their, licensed mental health practitioner that, um, it just watching that and hearing the feedback even from their therapists and things like that and I know it's a more robust term than just therapist, but for ease of use of language, that you just watch the acceleration of the healing because Reiki being that stress reduction technique, that helping with those cortisol levels that then they can in turn also help with their experience in therapy and that reaction that can come from diving deep into these landscapes that is so challenging. It's really, really beautiful. And I think we all can say that we've seen firsthand the benefit of integrating the two and other practices that might be a part of the equation as well.
Absolutely.
So I'd like to have you get a little bit more specific about your course because it sounds like actually really valuable both for practitioners and teachers. So how people find it, what it's called, and what is in it, because I think it sounds like a really important benefit.
Thank you. So it's called Cultivating a Trauma-Informed Reiki Practice, and it's available through my website. It's hosted on Thinkific, so it's an online classroom for self-paced courses. It is about 6 hours of material thereabouts, and a workbook. And as I said, it walks through 10 principles of trauma-informed care, beginning with the importance of our self-practice. So the importance of continuing to be in our own internal development and self-reflective abilities, so that we can really, be in touch with how we're conducting our spaces and to be able to be resilient when we need to make changes. It walks through things from having a historical perspective, looking at the way in which Reiki came into the United States and the fact that there's trauma embedded into that story, very specific personal trauma with specific people that brought the system of Reiki here, as well as the kind of cultural context of it being the era of World War II, when literally Japan and the United States were mortal enemies of each other. So there is trauma embedded in the story of the fact that we are Reiki practitioners in the United States. And I find that incredibly important to hold in our perspective as Western Reiki practitioners and to grapple with and to be with in our bodies and in our feelings and in our knowledge of that history. And from there, looking at the ways in which we hold spaces that make room for justice, make room for acceptance of people. So there's one of the 10 principles is looking at our, social and our who we are in the world, relative to privilege, relative to oppression of other groups. I am a white person in the United States. I have a lot of power and privilege in some areas and not in others. That matters when I'm holding a position of authority within a lineage that comes from a place that is not my own ancestry. So we work with those sorts of perspectives to a certain degree. I take a much deeper dive into that direction in other classes, but we touch on it in the trauma-informed Reiki class. And then it's looking at, as I said, working with elements of our practice. So of course, how do we handle touch is a big one. The sorts of language that we use, invitational and empowerment-based language, we talk about a lot. How to organize our physical space so that it eases the potential for triggering things for folks. The way that we offer choice and options in how people experience the session, and really reiterating that choice over and over again, naming the dynamic that people often have where we tend to defer to professionals. We might defer our own power. We might defer things that we would prefer or not prefer. We kind of are inside of a medical model where we go to the doctor and maybe a lot of unpleasant things happen to us and we have to just submit to those things. The medical world, medical trauma is a whole other area.
There
But
it
I
is.
noticed that mindset of I am coming to an expert to help me with something, and so I have to submit to whatever they're going to do, comes into our space as well. And it is not needed here. We do not need to hold that perspective here. But our clients are going to be often used to that. And so how do we talk with them, communicate with them, reiterate that so that they feel like they have power over their experience, and that this is a collaboration, that a Reiki session is a collaborative experience, that we have expertise, we have knowledge, we know things that the average person does not, that we can bring, but the expert of that person's experience and history is that person. They are the expert of their own experience. And so regarding our clients as experts in the room along with us, peers that bring a different expertise than we do, is a tremendous point of empowerment. And that's not us empowering them. Each of us has our own power. It's making room and acknowledging that they, in fact, enter our space with their own power, and that needs to be acknowledged and made room for. So those are many of the topics, not all, but many of the topics that we explore in that class. And it's a series of videos, of journaling prompts, of worksheets, of historical data in about a 77-page workbook that comes with the class.
Wow. And another aspect that I think is our listening skills. That to me is another big piece of it, because often we are the only ones truly listening to a person, giving them the space to express themselves. And I love the way you word that like, I'm not the power, I'm not the expert, I am a person here with you, listening with you, and letting a person take their time to express if they want to. Not everybody wants to. So there's that part of consent too, or not trying to get them to say everything that, we're asking them, but opening the space for that. Because oftentimes many of the people have been unheard in their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that because I do want to talk a little bit about SoulCollage too. I just do want to add that, if you are a teacher or a practitioner, this topic is really important. And if you're a teacher, it's important to be teaching in your class about, the idea of consent, preference of touch, facilitating a space that is safe and inviting. And like Colleen said, I know we teach that, but it might not have been taught to somebody, and so therefore they don't know to pass these kinds of things on. So just a really big awareness of that. And then obviously, as a practitioner, these skills are important for you as well. But I just want to put that out there too, that for the teachers, this is an important thing to be passing along.
I want to add one more piece of it that I would say I had to really learn is just hugging everybody.
Yes.
That was one. I remember it really catching my attention when I had a young man from Saudi Arabia, and I just grabbed a hold of him, gave him a great big hug, and I just felt his whole body stiffen up. And now with the recognition, and of course, so much of that changed too with a lot of touch with in person through the pandemic. But
I,
that was
I
one that I've really had
I
to.
really appreciate you saying that. And that actually ties really in with that first principle of being in our self practice because being aware of what we need to feel safe and being able to meet those needs for ourselves rather than expecting our clients to is an important piece. I had a colleague who subconsciously, without being aware of it, really did assess the trustworthiness of other people with how warm they were towards him. So so he was a hugger, and if people had that like, "Ooh, don't hug me" response, he read that as that person is untrustworthy. And he wasn't aware he was doing that until I pointed it out. And then he felt defensive about it. And he's like, "Yeah, but if they're not warm towards me, then, and I'm like, yeah, but what could be the reasons why they're not like there's endless reasons why this person might not be warm. Culturally, it might not be something that is appropriate for them. They might be a person who has been harmed by somebody coming into their physical space and hurting them. So, being in touch with what do we need to feel safe and being able to meet that for ourselves and to allow ourselves to listen, as you said, to observe the other person and to create a space of neutrality until we have a sense of where our needs kind of meet each other. And that, while I just said that this is a collaboration, that we're peers, when a person comes to our studio for our sessions, we are in a position of power. This is our space. This is, we have authority in this space. And, we get to exercise that authority to a certain extent to how we, what we need, what our boundaries are, and so on. But that does become a point of pressure for other people if we're not paying attention to what they need. So I love that example that you shared. Thank you.
Yeah, I
And
used to always. Oh, go ahead,
I
Robyn.
just want to add into the conversation really quick around this is it may not be trauma or cultural. It could also be like, touch aversion. Not everybody is, a lot of people are sensitive to touch. And Reiki is for everybody. And, if we think of people that might be have neurodivergent, might be neurodivergent, like touch isn't comfortable for everybody. So it might not be through trauma or anything else other than, I know for me, like I have boundaries around touch, even though it's not from a trauma informed place. I just don't prefer it from
Yeah.
everybody.
Not
And
everybody wants to hug everybody.
exactly, not everybody wants to hug everybody, and that's okay. And I'm probably more comfortable with it than a lot of people. And it's okay that not everybody wants to hug everybody. So I appreciate this
Yeah.
conversation too, because it's a perfect example of this idea from a broad perspective as well.
Right. And we don't need to know whether or not a person
No.
is coming in here with trauma, right? These
Yeah.
principles are beneficial to everybody, right?
Yeah.
All of us benefit from
Yeah.
being well listened to and being respected and, having choice and all of that. So it's just a good way to root our practice.
And it can be comfortable too,
Oh,
like
it is.
it's like it can be like, you know, would you like a hug? Like in this kind of
Mhm.
context, if we're talking about hugs, obviously, if you're in a practice, if you're in a session with somebody in that kind of place, in a closed space by chance, like it obviously needs to be a little bit more of a foundational conversation. But when we're in spaces with each other, generally speaking, we're a pretty huggy community and we're a warm community, and that's okay too, because a lot of people, that is a part of like how they connect. They love that part of this community. I love the hugs. I want to connect with people in that way. And so that's a beautiful part too. But it's like, oh, would you like a hug, or is it okay to hug? And if they say, no, that's okay, I'm good,
Yeah.
or something like that, it can be as comfortable as that.
Yeah, and it just takes practice,
Yeah.
like getting used to asking for people's pronouns, for example. That can be really
Yeah.
uncomfortable if we're not used to doing that. But once we do it a little bit, using invitational language, using empowerment-based language, asking for consent before we hug people, right? That can feel uncomfortable, as you said, when we are not used to it. But it can become comfortable quite quickly, especially when we observe the positive response that people will tend to have when we give them that consideration.
Yeah, I used to, I would say, like for instance, when we'd either open the circle or close the circle and holding hands, and then it'd say, and hugs all around.
Mhm.
And it like, so then I learned, wait a minute, now, you know, and be sure you ask. And here's another option. I would give another option of
Yep.
a way that they can connect with each other without touch too.
Yeah, it's so
So
good.
yeah, I think that one is a really big one that I think is really helpful. I love this subject, Michaela. Thank you so much for the work you've done with it because it is such a necessary piece of both the practitioner and the client, the teacher and the student skill set.
Yeah.
And it creates just that sense of safety for everyone. And many practitioners, again, that staying within the scope of your practice, this topic is so helpful because it really helps us stay in that place as well.
Yeah. And I will say, just because of our timing here, as we're recording this, we're in holiday time. And so that course is on sale. All of my self-paced courses are on sale for the holidays. But by the time this is released, that sale will be over. And so I do want to just offer that sale price to your viewers past the December when it'll be on sale. So we'll put a coupon code for that down below. They can use it anytime.
Great. That's nice. Thank you. Well, let's do talk about soul collage because soul collage. I did the facilitator training, and it was back with Sina Frost even.
Yeah, me too.
You too,
Mhm.
yeah. And it has truly changed my life. And some of the cards and the messages of the cards make such a difference. So let you talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So Soul Collage was actually came to me before Reiki did. I was already a practitioner of Soul Collage when I found Reiki. And likewise, absolutely did change my life. I would say Soul Collage was really my first like dedicated practice, like something that I did consistently that, had the characteristic of both self-reflection, self-interrogation, but also with a spiritual component and really kind of working with the connections between my body, my mind, my heart, my spirit really began with Soul Collage for me. And then was really well supported by the system of Reiki. But what Soul Collage is a system of intuitive collaging that allows us to use our intuition, our imagination, and then found images to create small scale collages that represent different aspects of ourselves. It's based on Jungian psychological philosophy, which our founder, Sina Frost, was a Jungian psychologist. And, basically looking at the perspective that we're all made up of different parts, that you as an individual person, as one person, have many, many facets to your personality, to your belief system, your values, your memories, specific things that have happened to you, influences from people in your life, or even people out in the world whose art has influenced you, wisdom that you carry in your body, things that you know through your senses, as well as our connection to archetypal energies in the world. That all of these influences and more make up this beautiful, vast kaleidoscope of facets to each one of us. For people more familiar with psychological structures, the practice of family systems therapy is essentially exactly the same as the philosophy of soul collage, just using different methodology. One of my best friends is a family systems therapist, and we often giggle that we kind of do the same thing. But
yeah, I always say that about that too. I'm like,
it's the
there's so
same.
many parallels. Yeah.
Yeah. But, one of the benefits that we get to have is that we get to play with images. So we're making cards that are 5 by 8 inches typically. And that small scale allows us to do a couple of things. Yep, there they are. To do a couple of things. Firstly, to really focus in on a single energy. So a single aspect of ourselves, again, of which there are many. And to give that aspect of ourselves form, to give it a voice, to give it a way to speak to us and to speak to other parts of ourself. Our conscious self, the way that we think about ourself, the thoughts that we're having, the feelings that we're aware of, the behaviors that we're choosing in a given moment are such a tiny part of who we are. That conscious thought part of ourselves is a tiny part. And many of us have heard that metaphor of the iceberg, right? There's our conscious thought, the little piece that's up above the water, and then this vast body that's below the surface. That's our subconscious. And so SoulCollage gives us this way of opening up our subconscious and allowing a piece of us to speak that is probably guiding our thoughts and behaviors and feelings from behind the scenes, and we're probably not super aware of it. But it might be causing challenges for us. It might be causing confusion. It might be, giving us inspiration, but we're not really in touch with the source of that inspiration. And so, Carl Jung was one of the first to formalize the observation that collage using found images, so creating an image that is based on the happenstance of whatever images we encounter in the world, rather than I am going to draw a picture of a person climbing a mountain and there's a sun in the background, right? That's that conscious thought that's creating that image. When we work with found images, that is a very quick access point to our subconscious. So we get to play with scissors and glue and magazines and create images, and then let them introduce themselves to us. Let them explain why they're here. Let them answer questions that we have. Let them tell us what they need from us, what they're trying to get us to pay attention to, what they're afraid of, what they are absolutely committed to that's maybe causing problems in our life, right? So that we can understand ourselves better, be more conscious of how we feel, what we think, and ultimately how we behave in our lives. And it's super fun.
It's really fun. Some of the cards, and we just did one of our distance Reiki shares on the topic of divination, because it's also a divination deck where you can go back and pull the cards at different times to read the cards. Some of them you can create with that intention in an archetypal sense. For me, most of the time, all of my cards are just based on images are placed out, and whichever ones, I'm like you say, the found images that I'm called to are there, and I use those for the collage, and then read them with the statement of I am the one who.
Yeah.
Are you going to just talk
And
about that?
And that's the other reason for the small scale, right? Is so that they can be functional as an oracle deck. And I often call them the oracle of you. And the distinction between a SoulCollage deck and a tarot deck or other oracles is that the meaning of the card comes from you. There's nobody else telling you, there's no booklet saying, this card right here, it means X, Y, and Z. Oh, it goes this way. This one here means X, Y, Z, right? That narrative, that meaning making is coming from you, from your subconscious and your conscious, the dialogue between them, the, parts of your history and your memory that are meaningful to you. You can even work with another person's SoulCollage deck, but they must not tell you what those cards mean, right? Again, you're the one who reads them and gives them meaning. And so, but other than that, you can absolutely use them just as you would any other oracle or tarot deck. And in fact, you can use those same types of spreads or create your own. And, again, allow them to be in dialogue with you and with each other. One of the things that I do with SoulCollage is I do coaching with people or mentoring. And we use the cards as a way to, bring into focus what it is that they're working through, what their questions are. These are oftentimes people in transition. They're about to retire, or they're about to, make some other large change in their life. And there's so many things that come up when we're in a big transition, and it can be hard to focus. What's the next right thing to do? Why am I so afraid of this? What do I really want out of this transition or this choice? There's no good option here for me. How do I live with that? Or I'm so excited, but I'm also afraid. And so we'll, use the cards to make a constellation to map this change, this transition for them. And it's so fun and startling every single time to see the ways in which the pathway that people are navigating, the choices that they have to discern, do I go this way or that way, becomes so clear. It just becomes so clear why they're doing what they're doing, why they're motivated in a particular way, where their roadblocks are, what they need to shift and to change so that they can move forward, and how they can bring joy and excitement and clarity and imagination into whatever it is that they're navigating.
Yeah, I would say my SoulCollage cards have been instrumental in some of the depth of understanding about myself at levels that I don't know that I would have achieved without it. And I saw the card you lifted up with the skull on it. This particular card was probably one of the most significant messages of my life. And not to go into the details about it, but some of the ones, and then in life transition, one of the ones that I did when we had a 30-acre farm that had been my lifetime dream. I grew up in San Diego. We moved to Oregon, ended up with the farm, and it had been something I pursued from 5 years old. We moved from that farm into a neighborhood. And so at the time when I knew I was moving, I was so like, what is going to happen? How am I going to feel about this? And did a soul collage card, and the ultimate message was, you live in a park, you don't have to own the park. And it has, that message brought so much peace. We moved to take care of my mother. And so, and into a neighborhood, and thought it would be temporary. But all around us, even though I'm in a neighborhood, is still forest. I can easily get to the parks. We live here in a beautiful place. And I reflect on that so often.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I think the teachings of the cards, they show up repeatedly over the years of like, oh yeah, the reflection aspect of them too.
Absolutely. And I saw that you also had a mountain lion in that picture. I've got mountain lions all over the place.
I noticed the mountain lion behind you.
Yeah, I have a lot
Michaela.
of cards with mountain lions on them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you can see too the cart. This is a cart full of people, and it was showing me how I pull a cart around full of people. And speaking of consent, some of them would get in without me knowing, some would get in, and there would be a time frame with it, and some of them I would pick up and put in my cart.
Yeah.
And thinking that I was such a good person.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what this card said at the very end of it, it's like it's better for people to walk beside you instead of pulled behind you your way. And I ultimately realized it was actually a control aspect.
So
And
many
it shifted
layers.
everything.
It's just one question, right?
Yes.
Why
One
am I
question.
moving? How can I be at peace with that? Oh, let's tell you a story. Let's
Okay,
let's recruit some other parts. Hey, who's afraid? Hey, who's relieved? Let's come talk about it.
yeah, exactly. It'd be like, man, and it was breaking my back. That's the other piece of it, is my back was breaking. And literally. And so yeah, and the mountain lions coming in like, hey,
Loner
hey, by the
time.
way, hey, it
Well,
was life changing.
Yeah. I know the thing is I'm looking at the time and we are getting close to time. So
Yeah.
I know, Michaela, also you have a podcast. Can you talk about that really quickly and tell us
Yes.
what it is? So I
Yeah.
love the Soul Collage. We could have a whole podcast just on Soul
Yeah,
Collage.
I'm down. We can do it
Yeah.
anytime. Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, so there's a couple of media places I get to play. So one is the Reiki Women Podcast, which I do with my colleagues Bronwyn Logan and Carrie Varela, and we've been at that for a couple of years, and it's just a really wonderful kind of point of grounding for the three of us. Bronwyn is one of my teachers, Carrie is a colleague. We actually did that business training together back when I was trying to figure out how to run a business. Um, and it began with kind of the observation that the practice of Reiki is dominated by women. There are more female practitioners, female identified practitioners than male. And oftentimes the leading voices that you hear, the leadership, the people kind of leading the dialogue tend to be men. That's a super familiar dynamic just from the world. And we wanted
Yes.
to talk about that. We wanted to just kind of create a space where we could say, hey, let's talk about leadership inside of Reiki. Let's talk about gender dynamics. And that, quickly expanded into, wanting to talk about all of the dynamics. The three of us all practice from the perspective of Reiki's Japanese origins, which I said before is a very different system of practice with a different worldview, a different understanding of what Reiki even is, a different way of practicing than the Western form. All three of us have been trained and have experience in both. And so we, spend a lot of time really educating about what the original form of Reiki is, why that matters to our daily life, and, just kind of exploring whatever is up in the world or in our lives, questions that we've gotten from folks, things that we've noticed that have gotten under our skin. We need to have a good old ranting session about, whatever we got to do on a given day. And then once a year, we do an interview series. So we're actually wrapping up recording for this year's Radiance series. They're all themed. The first one was on women's health, and this one is on animal Reiki. So, really delightful conversations with animal Reiki specialists. And that will begin airing in January. So, yeah, it's just more or less weekly. We do our best to get them out weekly, but, we're busy, and Bronwyn's in Australia, so we can't always make the
I
time
was
zones
wondering
work.
if that was Bronwyn in
Yeah,
Australia.
she's in
Yeah.
Australia, and Carrie and I luckily are both on the West Coast, so we're in the same time zone. But um, yeah, roughly a weekly show. So Reiki Women Podcast, primarily on YouTube. There are episodes out on audio podcast platforms, but we're primarily focusing on YouTube. And then I also have my own YouTube channel, Heartscapes Reiki, where similarly I just do a lot of educating about the Japanese origins of Reiki, and always come back to the question, what does that have to do with my daily life? Um, you know, I believe that Reiki from its origins is actually incredibly elegant and effective in working into our daily life in a wide variety of ways. So just explore that, have conversations, do practice together, talk about current events through the lens of Reiki, whatever musings is on my mind on a given day. And then I also have an interview series, and on that channel called Reiki Crossroads and Connections, where I talk with practitioners from outside of the system of Reiki that have significant overlaps with our goals, and we just have nice conversation like this. So
Sounds
both of
great.
those links we can probably put.
Yeah, we're going to put all the links in the description. So, generally speaking, though, you can find Michaela at heartscapesinsight.com. And you can find we'll put the description or the links to the YouTube and stuff like that. But I'm sure all of the links to all of your things are also on your website.
Yep.
So, the general place where you can find everything.
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, great. What a great conversation. As we always say, we could keep talking for a long time. We'd have
Yes.
a lot to talk about. So
Yeah, thank you
thank
both
you.
so much for having me on and letting me talk about my favorite stuff. And yeah, if you want to have that longer conversation about SoulCollage, I'm down.
We'll have to come back. There's so much to talk about. So, and maybe some of your colleagues want to come on at the same time. We
I'm
could
sure they
even do
would. Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. We could have the Reiki Women podcast with the Benellis.
Yep.
Power,
That would
power
be
combo.
Yeah.
that would be so fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
we'd just have to schedule enough time.
Exactly.
There'd be so much to talk about.
A half a day. It'll be a
Yeah.
retreat.
There you
Yeah,
go.
right. Well, Michaela, thank you so much. Heartscapesinsights.com. So people can find you again. Just
Mm.
again, thank you so much. What really valuable and important topic today. All of the topics are important, but this one I feel like we haven't really had anybody talking about this, and it's so essential. Yeah.
Thank you
So
for
thank
being interested.
and for all of our listeners, thank you so much. As always, we love our Reiki community and all the different ways that we share our gifts together. So many blessings and lots of love to everyone.
And you can find us at ReikiLifestyle.com.
Oh, yeah, we should say
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah. It's good enough. All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much.
Yes.